A Quiet Place isn't perfect, but there's a lot it does right, and one of my favorite aspects of the film is the opening sequence. Let's break down the opening 8 minutes and how it tells us about the world of the film and sets the stakes for the movie high. The opening sequence divides well into two parts. The first is the scene in the pharmacy that introduces us to the family and sets us up with the minimal necessary exposition to understand the world. The second part is the first suspense sequence of the film. We'll look at each individually. This video is sponsored by Audible. Click the link in the description to get a free audiobook today. Before we've even seen any part of the film, we get the Day 89 title card. This type of title has almost become a trope for apocalypse films, so even the mere use of it here gives the audience some information about the setting. A significant or catastrophic event for our characters or the world has occurred 89 days ago. It also gives you a question that you want the answer to right away. 89 days since what? The very first frame starts feeding us some of the answers to that question. The event was physically disruptive in some way, and things are bad enough that no one has tried to put things back together, as evidenced by the grass growing up through the traffic light. The second frame gives us some more information about the setting, a rural area with a low population, but it also keys us into the fact that the event was catastrophic enough that people couldn't use their vehicles to escape or abandon them, perhaps because they were killed. We also get our first clue as to the unique nature of this world. The sand path shows us that something or someone is present, but unless you've seen the trailer, you wouldn't yet know what it is used for. The next few shots are establishing shots for the first scene. We get more clues about the nature of the event, lots of missing people, and see a pharmacy that has been mostly looted. There are some subtler clues about the nature of the world that you might notice here, like the fact that the items with noisier packaging like bags of chips remain on the shelves. We also see two children trying very hard to be quiet, but that the youngest child isn't quite as careful as the oldest child. But as far as we know, they could be playing a game. We learn through visual cues and sound design that Reagan, the oldest girl, is deaf. There's an interesting bit of sound design used for this. Since the sound design for this scene, and a lot of the movie in general, is incredibly quiet, portraying the audible perspective of a deaf person might be difficult. You could make things completely silent, but instead they opted for a more obvious audible cue. You're going to have a hard time hearing this if you're not wearing headphones or in a theater with a good sound system, but when we're within Reagan's perspective, the noise level is actually louder than the rest of the scene. But instead of clearly hearing the noises in the room, all we hear is a deep, muffled hum. This is also why we need the youngest child to be noisily running around. If the entire family was completely silent for this scene, there would be nothing for us to not hear from Reagan's perspective. Another thing I love about how this scene unfolds is the layered introduction of a lot of the family. We're tracking the movement and action of one of the family members and then catch a glimpse of a new character in the background. It first happens here. This shot simply and effectively communicates that one child is sick and that the family is here for medicine. The camera racking focus implies an association between the two subjects. And simultaneously, we get another background reveal of a new character, the mother, and see her trying to be extremely quiet, which clues us into the fact that the children aren't just playing a game. Part of what's great about film as a visual medium is the way you can quickly layer together information for the audience to pick up on, but many films fail to utilize this efficiency. Soon after that, we get another shot where we learn simultaneously that the boy isn't seriously sick, and that the family can communicate via sign language. The entire first 5 minutes is a flood of information for the audience, but it's presented in a layered, overlapping, and motivated way that keeps it from feeling too expository. The sequence with the youngest child drawing a rocket is important for 3 reasons. First, it's another clue about the severity of the situation. The family wants to escape, but can't for some reason, and a rocket ship is perhaps the only possible escape from this environment that a young child could imagine. The second reason is that it creates an emotional motivation for the youngest child's obsession with the space shuttle toy. Without this bit, the fact that the kid decides to play with a noisy toy would seem motivated by mere ignorance. But instead we get some context that helps us sympathize with why the child would be obsessed with the toy. It also gives us a meaningful moment between the siblings, which only makes the end of this opening sequence more impactful. The moment immediately following this continues to establish just how seriously the characters take staying quiet. and simultaneously reveals the father character in the background. And then we get a moment where the father is introduced and the relationship between the father and daughter is developed. This relationship will be perhaps the most significant one in the film, so it's necessary to start developing this early on. Then we get another moment that reiterates just how serious a loud noise would be and gives us a tiny bit of foreshadowing. It's telling the audience, if they hadn't thought about it yet, that the toy could make a loud noise and that would be disastrous. This marks the transition to the second part of the sequence. 5 minutes in, we've been introduced to the characters, developed some of the relationships, and learned some of the basic rules of the world. So the last half of the sequence is about two things: creating the first real moment of suspense in the film and setting the stakes high. A Quiet Place is mostly a suspense film, and there are several ways of effectively generating suspense. You can generate suspense using a feeling of uncertainty to create anxiety in the audience, but oddly, you can also generate a feeling of suspense by creating certainty that an undesired outcome will occur. A Quiet Place often uses dramatic irony to create this suspense of certainty. The shot of the youngest child picking up the batteries creates dramatic irony. The audience knows the batteries will go into the toy and the toy will make a sound, because we know the movie wouldn't have put emphasis on this detail if it wasn't going to happen. But the rest of the family is completely unaware of the impending disaster, so we're left waiting for something to happen that we don't want to see happen. And that suspense is built further by drawing things out with a simple scene of the family walking through the woods. In this scene, we learn the use of the sand we saw earlier, and that the family lives a good distance from the town. The music is more mellow and sad than it is tense, which builds the dramatic irony. The music matches how the characters feel, not the audience's knowledge, reinforcing the idea that the characters are unsuspecting of what the audience knows will happen. The music finally dies down and we're bracing ourselves for the sound. The content looks on the mother and daughter's face make it all the worse for the audience. Note that by this point, we don't need to see a shot of the toy making noise because we know what's going to happen. The suspense is extended a moment longer by first showing the toy in the background while we're in Reagan's audible perspective, and then we hear the sound while the camera is on the father's face. Because we already know what's going to happen, the focus can be on the emotions and perspectives of the rest of the family. At this moment, the suspense created by the dramatic irony is resolved. The bad thing we knew was coming has happened. New suspense is now created by uncertainty. What will happen to the child? We experience Reagan's realization of what's happening, not through sound, but through her parents' expressions, which gives us an idea of just how terrible her situation would be, living in a world where sound is deadly, but where you can't tell if a noise is being made. It's the audible equivalent of casting a suspenseful scene in shadows. As the monster approaches, we get very few glimpses of it. The focus remains mostly on the family's perspective and reactions. This is great because what's most important for the film ahead are not the details of the monster, but that the audience establishes an emotional connection with these characters. Because the film has been so quiet and restrained, it gets to use contrasting loudness to great effect here. And then it happens. The tiniest bit of hope that we held on to that the child might be saved is dashed. The sequence ends with the death of the most vulnerable character we've been introduced to so far. It communicates to the audience that the movie will cash the suspense checks that it writes. The audience knows that if someone dies in the first sequence, it would be incredibly surprising if no one else died by the end of the film. And if the movie is willing to kill off the youngest, cutest little kid, any of the other characters are potentially fair game. The original script didn't include this opening 8 minutes and pretty much starts where the movie picks up after the title card. But I think this sequence was a good addition because it clearly shows the consequences of making a sound early on, which makes all the subsequent scenes where characters are trying to be quiet more tense. This sequence is an excellent example of how exposition can be done efficiently and visually in a way that isn't too disruptive or obvious, and how filmmakers have to build and negotiate with an audience's expectations for a movie. I'm headed to the beach on vacation for a few days, and an essential part of that trip for me will be the audiobooks I take along. If audiobooks aren't a part of your summer yet, I want to encourage you to use Audible to get started listening today. While I'm at the beach, I'll be finishing up The Broom of the System by David Foster Wallace. I've been really enjoying the bizarre, hilarious journey it's taking me on. Go to audible.com/ThomasFlight to sign up. With your membership, you'll get 1 credit a month to spend on any audiobook, and that audiobook is yours to keep. Any credits you don't have will roll over to the next month. When you sign up using my link in the description or text ThomasFlight to 500-500, you get your first credit for free. Use that credit to get The Broom of the System, or whatever else from Audible's massive selection that suits your fancy, and get started listening before the summer is over. So go to audible.com/ThomasFlight or text ThomasFlight to 500-500 to get a free book and a 30-day trial. I'm always looking for audiobook recommendations, so leave yours in the comments below. If you're waiting for my next installment in my Directors Before series, I have one about Christopher Nolan coming later this month. If you appreciate my content and want to support its continued creation, go to patreon.com/ThomasFlight and check out what you get when you become a patron.